Hooray. Hooray. All right, so we're back, and that should be better. So I had audio trying to play through a distant pair of Bluetooth headphones instead of the microphone plugged directly in my computer. So now that that's sorted out, all I was going to do with today is essentially set the precedent for what I'm going to call the weekly Wednesday casual chat live stream, where I'm going to do questions and answers and talk to people, probably do select readings from some right-wing literature, and queued up relevant YouTube videos if there's nothing else relevant going on. And if there's some kind of thing where I have to do a very special episode, I'll announce that on Twitter with as much headway as I possibly can, and always re-upload the recordings to YouTube. And until I get the hang of it, I'm going to be spending an uncomfortable amount of time staring directly into the camera, silent, while I get the gears in order. So to start with, I just recently started a Substack where every week I'm going to be posting an essay about the things people seem to want to see, which is weird episodes from militia childhood and realizations about the Patriot movement and right-wing politics and everything else that went with it. And my first that I inaugurated the Substack with was my gun show essay, which covers a pivotal childhood gun show where there was a divider directly down the center of the Las Vegas convention building and an anime convention on the other side. And it's like my exposure to another subculture of weird nerds that was not the gun crowd, and how the gun crowd that I usually, like, my family was immersed in. Dog is upset at me. All systems go. And the gun crowd that my family was generally immersed in had to flex their ability to kill people if they wanted to maintain that they were superior to another group of weird nerds that were, if anything, as on the fringe of society as they were at the time. That was before the massive pop culture, like, normalization of anime as a fandom. That was still very much a niche thing, just not to the same degree it was in the 90s probably, but not quite what it is as a pop culture staple today. And following up from that, which is a thing I was supposed to post today with it, is my Red Pill Op essay, which is about my experience running into a white supremacist recruiting effort operating on 4chan. And I want to put together some citations to go along with that, because I bring up a lot of stuff and I want to get that extra proofread, because it was kind of the seed that planted my ability to understand what institutionalized racism was, and that there were incredibly toxic stereotypes baked into our culture about black men in particular, that white supremacists are able to use as a lever to apply force with their propaganda where otherwise they might not have a purchase. And that kind of sunk into the back of my head and was helpful many years later when BLM started gaining traction in the news, and a lot of people seemed to fail to understand what the protesters meant by institutionalized or systemic racism. And the other things I had to cover were childhood libertarian sci-fi book, Palace by L. Neil Smith, which has some amazing quotes in it, and something I used to think was a good book until I went back at it, and realized that it's actually not a good book. It's actually very bad, and largely an enormous political rant vehicle for the author. And then also, just because it came up in conversation with my mom the other day, I've got a video queued up from the police training video, Surviving Edged Weapons, which had contributions by a Filipino stick fighting and knife fighting instructor, Filipino fighting system instructor that my parents used to train with way back in the day. And he's been in a million movies, so if I run out of things to talk about, we'll go to that in a minute, because mostly I think the training video is absolutely hilarious. It made the rounds. Surviving Edge Weapons itself, the full-length thing, made the rounds a while back on the internet, and it was so strange seeing this thing that was just a VHS tape from my childhood that I remembered having to watch over and over again. Livestream, yes. Yeah, so you're going to be tearing your hair out at this one because everything is generic. I have next to no customization set up. I don't know what I'm doing, and I keep sitting in dead silence staring at the camera while I try to remember what I was going to say next. This is amateur YouTuber from 2015 hours, where we're getting the experience of Dakota trying to talk to you at a bar here today. But thank you for popping in. So like I was saying, I was going to start out with questions and answers, and probably also talk a little bit about the story of our family trip to the Marble Community Compound, which is the religious community that is frequented by Matt Shea and other Christian nationalist extremist leaders that invited Oath Keepers for an event headlined by Stewart. And there's not enough substance to it probably to make a whole blog post out of the thing, but it did have extremely weird vibes. It's like you're expecting a fair or something like it, right? And it's supposed to be this major liberty movement, patriot movement, militia people event that is being put on by this religious community. And when you get out there, it feels like the beginning of a horror movie where the cult is trying to lure you in. And probably one reason why it felt like that was they were probably absolutely courting Stewart either to move there or to at least become an associate of the Marble community and sucked a little bit further into the MASH network. But we were not that big of a crowd except for the Marble community people themselves. And they essentially put on a private county fair just for the relatively small number of Liberty Movement people that showed up. We had Stewart's amateur economist hanger-on, Brandon Smith, whose job was to go out in front of Stewart and scare everybody by talking about the coming economic collapse and the Atlantic and I think it was the Baltic Dry Index was what a bunch of the amateur economists were obsessing over with the coming collapse for a few years there, and had a concert by libertarian, like, semi-Christian rock performer Jordan Page, who actually is an amazing musician, and I'm sad that he was tied to something as toxic as Oath Keepers. But there just weren't that many of us, but the infrastructure was in place for a whole fair, and we were given enough meal vouchers for all the vendors to last probably about a week. And I don't know if he would ever have been capable of getting that, and I'm not tooting my own horn by saying that I'm more intelligent than Stewart. I think Stewart is actually kind of a dumbass. But I guess the justification in his head is that I don't possess street smarts to avoid getting ambushed in a back alley and getting my head stomped on and spit on because I put myself in a bad situation. That was a pretty common recurring rant. And that I was too head in the clouds and not focused enough on things like knife sharpening and man tracking. So you get kind of the almost like situation like Stewart would feel superior to people because he had some academic credentials, and then would feel superior to people that he thought were smarter than him by flexing his superior street smarts or his military background. And he was able to... I actually really liked that class. But yeah, he was able to leverage each individual part of his resume to maintain an air of superiority to whoever he was talking to. So he always kind of occupied the center of the credentials that people like seeing in a right-wing popular leader. And then was able to look down on everybody from that center point, depending on the circumstance. But yes, the man tracking class was tremendously fun. It unfortunately followed the pattern of every single Oath Keepers event, where we would show up for a thing. There's a set event, and it's got a schedule and an itinerary, and we've got one thing we're going to do. And Stewart could not handle a self-contained, limited class experience or any kind of singular event with a beginning and an end. He couldn't deal with it and had to hold everyone hostage for like a 5-hour conversation that everyone felt uncomfortable leaving, like socially awkward, to satisfy his narcissism. And that is how every single thing would go. Is how he almost killed the local CPT meetings in Eureka by himself, because he would show up and all these people are donating their Saturdays to go and do react to ambush training and go over solar power setups and everything else. And then Stewart and one or two super fan hangers-on, even if they were just the crazy people who showed up sometimes, would keep talking and holding court. Oh, hello, people are chiming in. I really thought I was just going to be talking to myself in my shed, just like every regular Wednesday, for an hour straight. Thanks for dropping in. So we're talking about Stewart's narcissism in making every single training event go on for far too long. And so once he had his coterie of fanboys gathered around him and engaged with him, he would create a conversation circle where they would keep talking about the same old things that he always talked about for about 4 hours straight, and everyone else would feel uncomfortable to leave. Socially awkward being the first guy to leave a party, right? And eventually people just stopped showing up because they couldn't do that every single Saturday. And Stuart never got tired of it and did that every single Saturday. And he would do the same thing at other people's events. So at the end of this man tracking class, where we break out, we get our little certificates by noon. I still have my man tracking certification somewhere. It's in a folder. I don't know enough about Castro to draw connections there. I know Castro probably could have organized standoffs better than Stewart did. So that's a point in his favor. But he held this entire tracking class hostage for about 5 hours. And it was, at this point, going on like a... yeah. And at this point, going on probably about a 12-hour day, because this was a fairly intensive man tracking class, and everybody just wants to take their certificates and go home. But he holds everyone up with a conversation circle for 5 hours. And then, as it starts to get dark, Stewart decides we should do force-on-force training. So everybody gets out and removes the magazines from their rifles or picks up brooms to use as prop guns. And Stewart harangues everybody into forming tactical teams to practice the Australian peel, which is a breaking contact technique, and moving and patrolling in the forest as a unit, which is fine, but nobody signed up for that. Everybody was supposed to be home hours ago. That's exactly how it was. And so this is like in the moment where everybody is relieved that finally the conversation circle is over with and they can go. Then Stewart breaks out the training, because that is the other way that Stewart would be able to get his narcissistic supply, was by doing tactical training and flexing his paratrooper skills from the 80s. And so I got thrown into a fire team with, I think, a Blackwater contractor and somebody else who was a veteran, who I can't remember what service branch. And then obviously I'm performing terribly because I'm a mostly untrained teenager trying to keep up in a maneuver drill with two people that have actually been in a firefight. And Stewart, who never participated in these things, is just standing on the sidelines laughing at me. Everything he ever knew about small unit tactics and light infantry skills was what he remembered from his Vietnam veteran instructors when he went through airborne school. And he was in for a very short time, so almost everything else, like he traded tactical training for most of the dental work that I received for my entire childhood, and almost all of it was just derived from Jeff Cooper books and H. John Poole books and other manuals that he kept by the side of his bed. That depends on who they could get. I think a lot of people who burnt out on Oath Keepers, and there were a lot of people who burnt out on Oath Keepers, the turnover in the board of directors was constant and horrendous. Most of them are still and dead set against what they view as the liberal establishment, probably still believe in the New World Order. They just burnt out on the movement in its current incarnation, and Oath Keepers in particular. And they drifted away because of that, but they would still be ideologically opposed to testifying before a majority Democrat select committee of Congress. And a lot of these guys have, I've been told secondhand, covered up some of Stuart's misdeeds while he was out on operations entirely to protect the movement. And Tattenhove was a weird case because he started from a little bit further outside of the usual Patriot circles. Got super immersed, was incredibly drawn into Oath Keeper's inner circle, and then managed to escape once he had a place to live where he could leave and didn't have to rely on Stuart to make rent, is my feeling on what happened. So as far as people who are willing to completely turn on and burn Stuart and Oath Keepers, Tattenhove might have been the closest witness to Stuart available, and the one with the most knowledge, and especially the one that was present for the largest amount of radical shit pre-January 6th. So he might have been the best. And my personal take on that is that his testimony in what Oath Keepers was and is the committee has not contacted me. You'd have to ask Tasha about whether she's talked with them or not. But I have not been in touch with them. I'm available, and I've sent messages to some people to make it clear that I'm available to talk, but it's pretty well understood that I have a bias, and of course I'm trying to just be as truthful as possible in every single thing that I do, both as a good practice for the rest of my life, and because reformed right-wing is going to be a huge grifter industry in the coming years, unless we get around to DeSantis dictatorship, and then it's not going to be. But if the country survives in its present form, reformed right-wing is going to be a huge grifter industry in a few years. So I just have to, if I'm going to keep talking, I have to establish that I'm ultra honest. But I think if I were called to testify, it could be too easy to discount my testimony as biased and as deeply slanted. And that's probably why, like, I can't believe I forgot his name. Yeah, well, as far as I know, Jason Tattenhove was not actually involved with Oath Keepers by the time of the 6th either. All he had was an inside view of Oath Keepers during the big government standoffs, Bundy Ranch, Sugar Pine Mine, and White Hope Mine, when Stuart's cash cow was becoming standoffs with the federal government over BLM land disputes. And that is relevant to speaking my truth and being as honest as possible is going to sound pretty biased and slanted, because what I hold to be true is a pretty hardline position on Stuart and militias. And if they want me to go up there and trash him, I'm available to do that. I think there's a decent chance I or my mom could be called to testify, if not in Stuart's trial, then in the sentencing hearing. Because that seems to be where they're pulling family members' testimony for a lot of the J6 defendants previously, is the sentencing hearings. And we'll see. A big part of it might just be that they don't want to turn it too much into the Stuart Rhodes show, because they're just trying to establish that Stuart was there as a known anti-government paramilitary leader who had previously done these things and was waiting for a civil war. Yeah, I think so. And he was knowingly brought into the chain of command anyway. And I am deeply excited to eventually hear more about this alleged phone call where Stewart and some dudes in a hotel room were on the phone with a go-between who could have put him in touch directly with Trump. And I think that is going to be very important if that go-between is found out and there's corroborating witnesses. And I've been told that some of the Oath Keepers who have pled out, like, were very close to Stewart. Because Stewart always had a pedestal boy who could do no wrong that he would take with him everywhere. That would be like his fanboy backup dancer and favorite person in the world. And if his current pedestal boy flipped on him, they would probably have some really damning testimony from being attached at the hip and up Stewart's ass 24/7 all through the 6 until Stewart got tired of him, or kind of looks like just freaked the hell out and broke his cell phone in half and fled to the hills. Which is... I don't remember the name, and this is a secondhand, like, all these people that he was involved with by January 6th, the leadership turnover in Oath Keepers had become so dramatic that in a given year, Stewart's inner circle was unlikely to be the same people as last year. Like, nearly 100% turnover within every 6 to 8 months of his inner circle of favorite people. But the pattern held true, and unless Stewart was in a deep, dark, depressive episode, he always had a pedestal boy. And I know that some of those Oath Keepers pled out. So if one of the ones that pled out, and then he always had a very harsh, dramatic falling out with his pedestal boys is the other thing. And like, those were the bridges that were burned the hardest over and over again. Was his favorite person in the world would become a lying snake who stabbed him in the back. I don't think Stewart is like the Charles Manson-ish charisma and wherewithal to pull that off. I can tell you from stuff that I saw when he had his tabs open on his work computer and was asking for my help with stuff, that, like, if Stewart was unwilling to do shit with other dudes, then he was willing to go right up to the line, at least as far as all of his porn tabs were concerned. It was all about, like, dangerously close proximity, like wife swapping, and you can only have ships passing by each other in the same harbor so many times before something accidentally scrapes. So I think there is a chance that Stewart had weird shit going on with a lot of people, because, again, like I covered in Tony Michael's podcast a little bit, is there was a repeating pattern of behavior that led me to believe that Stewart wanted to be like the warlord of a post-apocalyptic polycule, that he was going to effectively have his compound that he ran like David Koresh, except a little bit more Roman. And that was the dream. He wanted to be, like, used to joke all the time with people about how his I think there's a good chance the balls have touched. I might even be likely. And it's really, really, I can think of so many jokes about that the committee has potentially a witness that is so close to Stewart that they may have touched tips. But at the same time, I know that for a good part of Tattenhove, his personal relationship with Stuart, Tattenhove had a broken leg, isolated in a cabin in the middle of the woods in winter, unable to pursue his main source of income in working as a wildland firefighter all year, with multiple kids and a disabled wife. And, I mean, he went in whole hog on the opportunity that Oath Keepers presented. He's moved up. And I believe the first place that he lived in Montana, Oath Keepers, the organization, was paying the rent on his first house, this little cabin, for a while before he eventually found another place to live at the survivalist teen ranch location run by the woman who did the medical support for Oath Keepers at Bundy Ranch, who also hosted CPT. So he went from living in a house paid for by Oath Keepers to living on the compound ranch in a rental house from essentially a Stuart loyalist who was also a person who rented a lot of housing and provided housing to like local sovereign citizen figures. So he went all in, and then once he was up here, basically every living situation he had, he was kind of stuck and like dependent on Oath Keepers for his livelihood until he saw a chance to make a clean break. And I believe Stuart was living with him before his leg broke, but like, I know he got himself into that situation. He's a grown man. He made the decision. And I personally liked him the times that we hung out and were around each other a lot while he was living in Eureka, and met him on the fire line a few times at big incidents in local national forests. But just crossing over a fence in the snow out to go get firewood, from what he told me when he showed up to our custody hearing. But like, I hesitate to make fun of his and Stuart's very, very likely personal relationship too much. I mean, it's not even an open secret. It's just common knowledge in Eureka from everybody who knew them that they were swingers and pretty aggressive about letting potential like play partners know that they had an open relationship. But I hesitate to make fun of his very likely personal relationship with Stuart, because any relationship where Stuart has power and control is inherently a toxic and abusive relationship. Yeah, I think it was. And I think, like I said before, part of what may have pressed Stuart to suddenly freak out and start demanding to speak to the committee live and unfiltered was his fear of what Tattenhove might have to say. Because if they did do any gay shit while they were living together at all, it could potentially sink Stuart with his base in a way that being a traitor would not. Like, treason to the illegitimate liberal government is a point in his favor. If he did anything gay with one of his subordinates, that would mean he also has to face the wall, according to the crowd that he is now trying to appeal to. He is doing radio interviews with the likes now of Dinesh D'Souza and very fringe Christian MAGA news channels in his weekly phone calls from prison. So, if that happened, and if Tattenhove comes out about it, that could kind of crush Stuart's image in the movement and prevent him from ever getting his trajectory to a phoenix-like rise from the ashes that he's imagining. And anytime any of his pedestal boys ever turned on him, or had a falling out with him, or even tried to quit Oathkeepers and leave, he acted as if it was a lover's backstab. It seems to be that it's just allowed for him to have his weekly phone calls. Can't do video calls, but he can do... And it is a good thing from a prison reform standpoint, where, like, I have to stay consistent in my personal principles, where people in prison awaiting trial should have fair access to the press, so that people know they're not being mistreated while they await trial, and it protects civil rights activists and agitators and people fighting for a better America than the one we live in now, just as much, if not more, than it protects the right-wing fringe and continues to give them a platform. Because people that are a threat to the system as a whole, and not just a threat to the current people in charge. Hello to the new people. Yeah, the people who are a threat to the system as a whole, and not just the people in charge. And this has largely historically been racial justice and labor groups, are always going to be treated more harshly by the law and by state security than right-wing fringe groups that, if successful, would entrench the power of special interests that are already in government. And so that's why I think it is a good thing that Stewart's access to the press is not being limited, and he's getting the same press access that any other prisoner would. And his very short interviews, like Tony just said, are scattered and not very focused. He does not say very much with the time that he has, and I feel like he's mentally falling apart just a little bit. So I don't feel that his having a platform is, at this moment, particularly dangerous, especially because his credibility was so damaged inside the movement by the rumors that he was an informant before he went inside. Now, the rebuilding of his reputation is beginning, and his sister, my Aunt Kelly, is on the board of directors for a nonprofit to fund January 6th defendant legal slush funds and legal defense funds, and collect donations. And there are solidarity with Stewart hashtags. So he has had a bit of an image rehabilitation, but not too many of the people who are... Okay. So my mommy is kicking me out of my live stream.
I'm not kicking you out. I am tiptoeing in, one, to say hi to your dog.
Okay, yes, hello to the dog.
And to pop in. Oh, have you?
Okay, so you got a short interview to do?
No, I'm just saying hi to you.
Oh, okay. I assumed you
meant. I'm just rating your set.
Okay, so if anyone has... I think she's been on CNN a couple times before, but... what face-biting guy? Are you familiar with a face-biting guy in relation to the J6 defendants or the fundraising?
Face-biting guy. Why does it sound familiar, but I can't place it?
Yeah, I didn't hear anything about it. So if anybody's got any questions for Tasha, I asked her to pop in real quick, and then I forgot that I did that, and I assumed that she needed the headphones for a CNN interview. Nope. But no, she's just hijacking the space by request.
I'm just rating your spot. I don't even need to be in there. I can just be here and relay.
And I out myself. Here, I'm handing you the conch.
No, I am not camera things.
Oh, were you planning to stand off camera?
Yes.
Okay, you can go back.
Okay.
You look fine.
All right. Hi. Your doggy can't fit back there.
Oh, on the fundraising site. Okay, so you know what? Yeah, this is my mom in here. Say hello, everybody. And out in what we've been calling the podcast shed, and with this sign that I meant to hang up behind me, that I didn't get around to before broadcast time, and this is going to be my on the air neon until I eventually buy on the air neon. So let's go ahead and see if we can find that.
Face biting guy. I tell you, that sounds really familiar. I feel like someone's been asking me about that.
Need a better laptop stand. I'm pretty sure I look like a monkey
Maybe an actual
trying to crawl in
That'd
through
be
their
great.
screens. Okay, so we have the Give, Send, Go campaign. Neoliberal elites using the FBI and deep state to entrap conservatives, get their delayed war with Russia back on track, blah, blah, blah. BlackRock and Vanguard are the oligarchy? So these guys couldn't have given a damn about affordable housing for about 30 years. And then now they're invoking hedge funds and investment firms that are privatizing and corporatizing single-family homes as part of the deep state just to grab headline material. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything about face bite.
But I'll tell you, the band names that come out of this thing are something else.
A bunch of horrible gateway pundit links. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and let's see. Oh, this is the first thing that popped up was the fundraiser for Roberto Menuda. That's amazing. They left him in the filthy city of Newburgh holding cell for 2 nights under what he described as third world conditions. So look at that. We got the right wing to care about the conditions of our prisons and humanity to prisoners. All it took was them getting arrested. Imagine that. Okay, so since I'm a dumbass and I don't know how live stream works, am I going to have to... Okay, no, I have to alter how the screen goes. Okay, we're going to... Yes, mirror inception. There we go. And now I'm sharing the screen, and hopefully this shows up correctly. And we have the Give, Send, Go, supposedly just a Christian fundraising site to compete with GoFundMe. Raised $30,000 for this guy. Specifies that they seized medical equipment that he carried on his person while working at security detail while he was volunteering. Because this is the echo of the same Kyle Rittenhouse style of legitimization, where if you're carrying a stomp bag or basic trauma shit on your tactical belt while you're out doing something stupid, then they can just say, oh no, he was just there as like a volunteer medic. No, like...
I think that's something Stewart had even said in his public, in some of his posts, right? He had said carry a medical bag. I think somebody quoted him.
Yeah, and it's almost more as a shield for public relations and against being attacked as for medical emergencies. And I know that police will beat the crap out of street medics at BLM protests or anti-fascist demonstrations, so that protection only goes one way. And yeah, so now I'm got infinite layers of Dakota. I'm just going to take a second to look at it because it's so beautiful. I just never get tired of looking at and hearing me.
You have an Inception Dakota on your screen.
Yep. So, yeah, and that was, yeah, if you could send me that link, that would be great. And that was just carrying a tourniquet on you, which also is something Tatnove used to do. We were talking about him earlier. And I let loose the all the jokes that I didn't on Tony Michael's podcast, and then kind of regretted it.
Yeah,
that's how it goes.
Yeah,
but
I know that I'm too emotional about that subject to look at it logically, so that's literally why I haven't spoken with him, or just because I see where he's coming from. I suppose I just have a lot of bitterness.
Any kind of relationship that he had with Stewart was controlling and abusive.
For real.
And we know that. Probably he had to plan an escape that was just as dramatic as ours.
Yeah.
In order to get clear. And I just, it just feels like it's being downplayed a little bit. He was injured. He was in
a bad space financially.
He's basically just completely dependent on Stewart, I think, for that whole time period. Mm-hmm. So I feel for him, and he left a very nice comment on my Substack, and I don't want to burn any bridges, but that is the way it went down.
Yeah.
That is the way it happened. But when he became an EMT in our local small town, he would go everywhere with his tourniquets and Israeli bandages and everything else clipped to his belt, like his accessories, which I guess some people do that. And I also see EMTs making fun of other EMTs that do that. It's kind of a divisive fashion choice. But yeah, I am just in love with this fundraiser.
Robert, yeah, is his name Minutia? What is it, Menudo?
Yeah, Menudo.
Menudo. This is the tattoo guy. Is that who that is?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And what was his involved? I get them all mixed up. Was he a golf cart person? He was tactical stolen.
Yeah, he was one of Roger Stone's security guards,
Okay.
And he was just there to protect patriots from violent BLM and Antifa who were not there.
Yeah,
weren't there at all. As the crowd dispersed, that wording. I'm going to screen share again. It's just because I like that wording so much. Oh, not recently.
Yep. I'm trying to get my face off camera and read your screen.
So, no, we have not recently been contacted by any of Stewart's boys.
No.
We've had some contact with a former associate editor. Was that what Elias was?
Well, Elias is just Elias.
Wasn't he editor-in-chief for Oath Keepers for a little bit? He was
all kinds of things. And he was also in that movie, Midnight Ride. He was in a couple of different films that Stewart was in. He's everywhere. He's just Elias. He's the Oath Keeper.
With Stone. Picture with Roger Stone on the 6th.
I don't know.
No, I don't know a name either.
I'm very out of the loop with most of the people on the 6th, just because we were so far gone at the point, and they all sort of blur together.
Yeah, like like I was just saying earlier, the turnover was so fast in Oath Keepers. If you're out of the loop for 6 months, it's entirely new people.
It's like not watching a UFC for like a year and then popping back in and go, who are these guys?
Completely unfamiliar with every single person competing. Yeah. And
Do a thing.
No, that's just the 7 o'clock.
I know.
Pager test. Yep.
Not go off for hours.
Yep. And this is an awkward memory from the crazy survivalist church that we used to go to in Kalispell. Like
Liberty Fellowship, Chuck
Yep.
Baldwin.
Chuck Baldwin's Liberty Fellowship, operating perpetually out of the conference room in the Kalispell Red Lion Hotel, so that Chuck Baldwin could take the donation hat and cut and run at a moment's notice without investing in a real church building. These guys all like to have black people around. It's like everything is projection, but they accuse woke corporations and the media of having like, and we need to have a black woman for, yeah, it stands shaky. We need to have a black woman for this number of diversity points, when that is in fact what right-wing political groups and militia groups do. So if you are black and you're mercenary and you want to get your name out there and you're okay with risking being wrapped up in a felony, going right-wing demagogue is the best way to immediately advance up into a very publicly visible location, and then you can just turn around and disavow later and try to build a career off of it.
Which is the way Mike Whip's going.
I was just thinking of that, yeah. Yes. And so, like Mike Whip, was Mike Whip also with Stewart at Berkeley?
I believe he was fairly new. I think he came in much later.
Okay.
Which is why he's going to play that he was just an employee.
Which is smart.
Yeah. He's probably got the best defense of any of them.
But yeah, whenever Oath Keepers had any non-white people, then they would always be front and center and focused on, just to detract from any allegations of racism and further the smokescreen. It's the same reason Trump brought, and look at my African American over here, brought up black people to the stage every time they showed up for his rallies. It's why Liberty Fellowship in Kalispell, on their church live stream to their original congregation back in Florida, had every interracial couple in the congregation get up on stage for Pastor Chuck Baldwin to do a show and tell of, look at how many of these non-white people we have.
And they all brought their wives up, but they all treat their wives like shit, so it didn't matter.
Oh, they should have drawn lots over that. So at any opportunity to have a black person front and center for optics, they're gonna do it. But in all likelihood, Roger Stone was not waiting over that woman's shoulder to see if she wanted his frozen sperm, like he was about Kellyanne Conway, which remains one of the creepiest things I've ever read in my life, next to, like, I think Stephen Molyneux obsessing over whether Britney Spears was still fertile. No, which one? No, Roger Stone, I think it was Kellyanne Conway, is on record saying that he wants to have, every time he's around her, he wants to go to a clinic and freeze some sperm in case she decides she wants children later in life when he's too old, and he can donate it so that she can raise the next great generation of American conservative political strategists, like a Fox News eugenics program. In fact, that's going to be part 2 of my screen share adventure.
I'm going to bow out.
Okay. Thank you for popping in.
Yep. We will see all you fine folks later. I'll see your doggy later. Hi, Mocha. You gotta get Mocha on camera.
Yeah, there's a very large dog just behind the camera. She's very big.
Your door is very oily. Nobody can ever break in.
No, not Kellyanne Conway, Laura Loomer, which I feel is I mean, no accounting for taste. No, future warriors of the freedom movement. I guess I could, yeah, you know what? That is. Yeah, I'd say that's a you can tell he was thinking this tweet in this photo. This tweet was fully formed in this man's head at the time that this photo was taken. Like, I don't even have much to say about that. That's just awful. No, that is one thing we absolutely There's one thing we absolutely don't want to happen is the offspring of Roger Stone and Laura Loomer, which, in my subjective opinion, if I were Roger Stone, I would probably reserve the majority of my frozen sperm for Laura Loomer over Kellyanne Conway. I feel like that's a solid decision from Stone's perspective, but it's still horrifying to consider. And so we're coming up right about the 1 hour mark, and I think it's... Yeah, I never followed up with what happened with that. If she has any social media where she talks about what it's like to live inside that circus, I meant to look that up, and then I never did. Which maybe I'll assemble like a friends of the strange children of right-wing figures. Will be like a political pundit Justice League. So. Time that we have, I'd like to read a little blurb from a childhood libertarian sci-fi book, and this is yes, a Bible reading from the Anarcho-Capitalist Bible, and this is L. Neil Smith, is quote-unquote science fiction author who was one of the major voices in propagating the brainworm that is anarcho-capitalism to the world. And I have a lot to say about anarcho-capitalism. We'd be here for another hour. Even way back in the day, in Ron Paul libertarian circles, people were laughing at the obscure fringe beginnings of the anarcho-capitalists because they were talking about like implanting all migratory fish and birds with microchips so that you could tell which one was whose property, because everything should be private property and the world would work better. I mean, that's they accept the tragedy of the commons as a universal physical law, and the only way to fix all of society's ills is to privatize harder. And if it's not working, you haven't privatized enough and you have too much government. And or else to just assign ownership of, well, not necessarily, because from my understanding of anarchist theory, a lot of it is supposedly the self-organization of small groups for common defense, good living, and to achieve common goals, where capitalism in its pure, unbridled, unrestrained form will naturally degrade into feudalism with time. It's the difference between Swiss canton and Prussian landlord. And so this guy was an early major presence. Hey, take care. Thanks for dropping in. Yeah, and it's I know that's a lie. I know that's a lie, but it'll get better with time. Talk to you soon. And he wrote a lot of stories. He wrote a lot of webcomics. He had this thing where he would circulate a petition, where if he got 100 signatures on a petition, he would run for president, and he got at most 10,000. But his different comics and online stories helped propagate anarcho-capitalism to popular culture and to all of our detriment, because it is beyond stupid. And so, in this book that I thought was really smart when I was a kid, we have this quote, which reveals the inherent ideological loyalty of all supposed right-wing libertarians, coded inside what they will excuse and what they will condemn. And this is a blurb at the beginning of a chapter, which is a quote from the unfinished memoirs of one of the book characters. So basically, this is the author, L. Neil Smith's personal political vision, presented as if it were relevant in-universe, in-character quote. At least the Nazis burned books in public. Liberals suppress opinions that differ from their own through influences they want kept secret. The right wing destroyed books. The left destroys authors. And that basically sums up the relationship of all supposed right-wing anti-authoritarians, anarchists, and libertarians with fascism, is the belief that essentially an early yelling at the myth of woke cancel culture is equivalent to or worse than the actual Nazis. And by making this declaration over and over again in popular culture, right-wing libertarians effectively draw a line in the sand and place themselves on the same broad side as the Nazis. Credit for correctly identifying the Nazis as right-wing, because a bunch of people seem to have trouble with that because their reading comprehension begins and ends with plain text reading and never extends to context. But just the wording of that inherently places the author more fully in alignment with Nazis than with modern American liberals that he's complaining about. And so before we go, I will pull off the screen share inception one final time, and we're going to look at a bunch of cops falling on their asses during a simulated knife attack. So here we have Inosanto, who was a knife and stick fighting instructor who actually trained my parents way back in the day. And his work was very practical, and in his youth in Hawaii, it was a thing in the area where he lived that people had their sticks that they carried, and they would conceal heavy sticks in the bushes on their daily routes where they had to walk. And if they would come across people that they had personal problems with, everybody would grab their concealed sticks and they would have a brawl in the middle of the road. It's kind of the same semi-ritualistic street brawl culture that you get in some really crappy Midwestern cities, where you got patch gangs that can't afford motorcycles and just walk around and beat the crap out of each other. This video was my childhood. This VHS tape. I always liked that. I thought that was absolutely hilarious. The way he throws the wall in his face. That is such a slick move right there. So this is the Bible of knife guy culture. The knife dudes who hold themselves as superior to gun nerds. This is their holy text. Love the sound effects added. I'm going to turn the volume on the video down a little bit. There's every chance that I've been drowned out. If the audio is playing at all. Now, of course, the main flaw with that is that they're testing with cops who, on average in the United States... yeah, I'll figure that out. And, but in the United States, police on average train about 15 hours a year. So there is every chance that someone with a concealed carry permit who trains more often would fare better. But the main takeaway, and I was reminded of this talking to my mom in the kitchen just the other day, and the thing I always think about when I think about being in a confrontation with someone with a knife, and to be clear, I never have. I have managed to avoid every single physical fight that I've been confronted with in my entire life. Every single potential fist fight or brawl or altercation with somebody else in my entire adult life, I have de-escalated and cooled down because it's not worth it. But the thing I always think of is the time that I was hospitalized with a dog bite, and remember this relatively small dog coming at me so fast and just repeatedly biting the shit out of my arm. And I was constantly one step behind its movements and always on the defensive and always reacting. And I could not keep up enough. And if I hadn't had somebody there to help me, I wouldn't have been able to pull the thing off of me, even though it wasn't that big. And that's what I think of when I see people talking about their training to defend against a knife attack. Is if you're being attacked by a knife, that's got to be one of the scariest things in the world. And none of these people who brag about wanting to kill people in a street fight, I don't think any of them understand what that would actually be like. So on that needlessly somber and morbid note, go ahead and throw a book on the floor. I'm going to call it for tonight, and I will be back on next week, Wednesday, and that will be the 27th at 6 p.m. MST, at 8 p.m. EST, and 5 p.m. Pacific, and I'm just going to be here bothering you and whoever shows up every Wednesday for Weekly Wednesday forever. And in all likelihood, it's going to remain the same 4-person audience that's here for this terrible, terrible live stream today. So thank you all for sticking with it, and everybody have a great midweek.